Pursuant to notice, we are holding a hearing on examining U.S. foreign assistance to address the root causes of instability and conflict in Africa. Today we'll be asking one of the toughest questions facing international development in the modern era. What are the best tools we can use to reduce conflict, and particularly what can U.S. foreign assistance agencies do to prevent and mitigate armed conflict? We will have the opportunity to ask leaders from several agencies how conflict in Africa affects their operations and how reducing conflict is taken into consideration for the development goals and objectives they set. To lead that conversation, I want to thank the witnesses that we have with us here today. Identifying the root causes of conflict is a complicated theoretical exercise, and experts differ in their assessment of conflict's main drivers. But what we do know is some complicated mix of factors can lead communities to be prone to conflict. While each of these factors may not be sufficient to predict conflict by themselves, if multiple of them exist, conflict is much more likely. This includes ethnic and religious divisions, resource scarcity, weak or corrupt political institutions, and human rights violations at the macro level, and low economic status, and lacking a strong sense of connectedness with your community at the individual level. While poverty itself does not create conflict, it can increase dissatisfaction with government and the odds that individuals can be recruited by extremist groups. We would be remiss not to note that each of these causes of conflict are also themselves consequences resulting from conflict. Refugee crises, government abuses, and economic disruptions are more likely once conflict breaks out, and each of them also creates the conditions under which extremist violence can be prolonged. Once conflict starts, there are many logistical, ethical, and legal issues to administering foreign assistance. This makes it even more crucial that the U.S. development agencies consider how their programs can be retooled to address the root causes of conflict to disrupt a feedback loop before it begins. The good news is that we know how to solve many of these societal problems that make conflict more likely. By growing foreign assistance and commercial opportunities for entrepreneurs while promoting the inclusion of marginalized people and institutionalizing democratic norms, we can make conflict much, much less likely. Today, I hope to hear from witnesses about how U.S. development assistance is and can be designed to address the causes and conflict of Africa in particular. I want to hear how the U.S. can show up in a different way that everyday Africans can see to develop long-time state and economic capacities with local partners, rather than only showing up to deliver assistance when there is an active conflict. I want to, with a sizable youth population and vast natural resources, Africa can have immense economic strength in the coming decades. This hearing is tackling one piece of that puzzle of how the U.S. can ensure this possibility becomes reality, and I look forward to what I'm sure will be a thought-provoking and hopeful conversation. Throughout my time in Congress, I have worked tirelessly to shift the paradigm from seeing Africa as a continent in need of crisis support to engaging Africa as a continent with immense opportunities for vigorous and mutually beneficial partnerships. And this hearing is part and parcel with that vision. So I want to extend my thanks to each of the witnesses and also to the subcommittee members for their participation in the hearing, which will be the last subcommittee hearing I lead in Congress. Thank you all, and especially to Ranking Member Smith for your partnership to advance the agenda to elevate Africa throughout my time serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I now recognize you for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Bass. Thank you not only for convening today's important hearing on U.S. foreign assistance that can help address instability and conflict and to meet humanitarian needs, but for the many years of our partnership together, traveling to Africa, and working on so many initiatives that I think have made a difference. I congratulate you as mayor-elect. We now have a mayor chairing a hearing here in Congress. That is, as we were talking a moment ago, 4 million people. That's the size of many nations, and you'll be mayor of those people. And I know you'll do a great job. And you have so many challenges that you are facing, from homelessness to crime, but you're going to do a great job, and I do hope you'll stay in touch with us here on the committee and me personally as we go forward. And I do want to thank you as well for working on so many bills and laws together. Our staffs and you and I are working tirelessly to try to get the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Protection and Prevention Act of 2022 passed. I would note parenthetically that you and I introduced it a full year ago in September, mid-September, on the day of emancipation for Frederick Douglass, and we were joined by his son, great-great-grandson, I should say, Kenneth Morris, and he's been a great advocate as well, not just for the legislation, but for combating the scourge of human trafficking, which is obviously modern-day slavery. And today's hearing is an important one, especially given how many lives in Africa are impacted by conflict and instability, but also given the need to counter outside actors in the sub-Saharan African region, which often have a malign influence, and of course, China and Russia, first and foremost, but also Turkey and Gulf states. First, however, we need to understand, I believe, the nature of the problem more clearly, and here's where I have a great concern. The administration has adopted a narrative that much of the conflict in Africa, particularly in West Africa and the Sahel, is driven by farmer-herder competition attributable to climate change. While this is certainly a factor, and the narrative is not so much false as it's incomplete, it overlooks what are the two most important drivers of conflict in much of Africa, and that is religion and ethnicity. I don't know if it's because people are uncomfortable with speaking about religion and ethnicity as drivers of conflict, so they would rather avoid it, but we will not understand the critically important country of Nigeria, for example, without understanding how religion and ethnicity drive conflict, namely the role of the Fulani ethno-religious supremacist view during the presidency of Buhari. To give an example, after the last Nigerian presidential election in 2019, the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, and National Democratic Institute came to brief our staff on what they observed. They spoke about the youth factor, the gender dynamic, and divisions between the political parties. It was only when pressed did they admit that religion and ethnicity was a major factor in the election outcome and the re-election of Buhari and his All Progressives Congress, APC party. The fact is that under President Buhari, we saw the Fulanization of key positions in the Nigerian government, particularly in the military and the security sector, but also with the removal of the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court, and marginalization of other groups. This is not so much strictly religious conflict along Muslim-Christian lines, as many on my side of the aisle focus on. If one is Yanuba and Muslim, or if one is Shia, one is also targeted through though Christians bear the brunt of the conflict in the critical Middle Belt region. Rather, it was a vision of Fulani dominance, which dates back to the 18th century, where Usman Dan Fodio waged jihad against non-Christians, but also against Muslim kingdoms that drove this conflict. I would also note that not all the Fulani share this vision. The former emir of Kano State, for example, was a voice for intercommunal peace. Sadly, however, this is one of the reasons why he was replaced. The reason why we often don't understand a country like Nigeria, in my view, is because we don't want to see what is in front of our eyes. To this point, when Bob Destro, Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights and Labor, commissioned and funded a study of who was committing violence in the Middle Belt of Nigeria, it was met with resistance within the Bureau and was slow-walked, and unfortunately the day after the new administration came in, it was canceled. The State Department did not want to know who was responsible for the violence in this extremely volatile region of Nigeria. This is not a way to make decisions on how resources to combat instability and conflict should be allocated. I would just say that I was deeply concerned and asked repeatedly that the administration revisit their removal of CPC status for Nigeria. I think that was a grave mistake. The facts on the ground did not warrant it. The International Commission of Human Rights certainly was a very strong antagonist to that view that was adopted. So I would again make my appeal to the administration to relook at that. I mean, CPC should be designated based on the record and only the record, and not anything else. And what we do in terms of sanctioning, obviously, is left up to the administration to decide. We do it with trafficking, we do it with religious freedom as to what ought to be meted out. But in terms of the actual decision, they are a CPC country. Again, I want to thank my good friend and colleague, the mayor-elect, for convening this important hearing.
Thank you. Now I want to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. First, we have Mr. Robert Jenkins, who serves as the Assistant to the Administrator for the Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization. A career member of the Senior Executive Service, Mr. Jenkins was previously a Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Bureau for Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance and the Director of USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives. Prior to joining USAID, Mr. Jenkins designed and implemented emergency relief and recovery programs with World Vision International in Southern Sudan and Sierra Leone. As a Thomas Watson Fellow, he worked under Archbishop Desmond Tutu in Cape Town, South Africa, as a liaison between the church's Peace and Justice Office and township communities. Next, we have Ms. Alicia Phillips Mandaville. She is the Vice President of the Department of Policy and Evaluation at MCC. Her 2-decade career spans the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and she has pioneered new thinking and tools at the intersection of governance, economic development, and technology. Ms. Mandaville previously served as the Senior Vice President for Global Programs at IREX, where she led the divisions delivering high-impact international development and public diplomacy programming. Prior to that, she served as the Vice President at Interaction, recreating the coalition's congressional advocacy team and expanding the development portfolio to address innovative finance, disinformation, open data, climate change, and change in fragile states. Our third witness is Mr. Andrew Herscowitz. Mr. Herscowitz is the first Chief Development Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. As CDO, he leads the DFC's efforts to pursue the most highly developmental projects in less developed countries. He reports directly to the Board of Directors, is a member of the Investment Committee, and is responsible for setting DFC's overall development strategy in coordination with the CEO. He is a career minister in the Senior Foreign Service. Prior to his appointment at CDO, Mr. Herscowitz was the coordinator of the U.S. government's Power Africa program from 2013 to 2020. He also served as the lawyer for USAID's Office of Development Credit, which has leveraged hundreds of millions of dollars in private sector funds through its loan guarantee program. And our final witness is Mr. Travis Adkins. He is USADF's President and Chief Executive Officer. Previously, he served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa at USAID. Mr. Adkins is also a lecturer of African and Security Studies at the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, where he concurrently teaches in the Prison Scholars Program of Georgetown's Prison and Justice Initiative. As an international development leader, he has over 2 decades of experience working in governance, education, humanitarian affairs, and women's and youth empowerment in over 50 nations throughout Africa and the Middle East. This includes serving as the staff director of the House Subcommittee on Africa, on my staff, I'm proud to say, working with leading international NGOs and think tanks, as well as within several branches of the UN system. Mr. Adkins has served in numerous international election observation missions in Africa and the Middle East with the National Democratic Institute, and he is a regular contributor to national and international media outlets on African affairs. With that, we appreciate all of you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Your written statements will appear in the hearing record, and under Committee Rule 6, each witness should limit your testimony to 5-minute summary of your written statement, and you can see the clock there, I presume. So there'll be another opportunity to speak when we do Q&A. We're pretty generous about the time. Mr. Jenkins.
Well, Chairwoman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. I recently visited the coastal West African nations of Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, and Benin with colleagues from the State Department and the Department of Defense. I also made a side trip to Ghana. And despite crises affecting much of the continent, I came away with a glimmer of optimism at how our colleagues and partners at Post are embracing the Global Fragility Act and the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, or the strategy. A theme I heard consistently on my trip was these 3 countries want to and need the United States to assist and partner with them, but they want to be in control of their own country's development trajectory. Like much of Africa, the countries of coastal West Africa are grappling with a range of factors undermining their stability, including transnational criminal systems, natural resource conflicts, contentious and sometimes violent elections, and deep-rooted corruption. These nations are affected by deep political polarization, often along ethnic, tribal, and religious lines, marginalization of minority groups, gender inequalities, and a bulging youth population frustrated with the challenges of underemployment and growing disconnect between expectations and realities. When we spoke with leaders, they told us how aware they are of these issues. They know they need to improve local governance, service delivery, and social cohesion. As a senior government official told me, the extremists understand our youth much better than we do, and that's a problem. They also know that a security response alone is not the answer and actually might backfire. In Africa, root causes of conflict are localized and dynamic. Therefore, solutions must be as well. According to the United Nations Development Program, the majority of recruits into extremist organizations come from borderlands, where people and communities have been marginalized for generations. 83% of recruits believe government only looks after the interests of a few. In Benin, since last December, al-Qaeda-affiliated militants have launched at least 23 attacks against security forces and civilians, resulting in numerous casualties. However, I also heard concerning reports of security forces using heavy-handed tactics, leading to further isolation and radicalization among marginalized and alienated populations. And we can't talk about prevention in coastal West Africa without talking about stabilization in the Sahel. The Sahel is saddled with weak, often illegitimate governments and a host of other challenges, including armed groups looking to recruit. USAID works with communities to overcome some of these challenges. In Burkina Faso, we helped reduce tensions by providing national identification cards to internally displaced people, thus reducing the likelihood of detention at security checkpoints. USAID's Women, Peace, and Security program in Niger supported the creation and training of women's leadership groups, enhancing their engagement in decision-making related to security and increasing their resilience to violent extremism. Elsewhere in Africa, USAID continues stabilization programming in Somalia, critical to building on security gains and strengthening local governance capacities as a bulwark against al-Shabaab. In Mozambique, a Global Fragility Act partner country, ISIS Mozambique is capitalizing on an underlying lack of trust in the government. In response, USAID is engaging communities in the northern province of Cabo Delgado, providing assistance to local governments to develop accountable and transparent systems to provide basic services and combat systemic corruption. Moving forward with our work across Africa, we must ensure all U.S. assistance targets underlying conflict and fragility dynamics and strengthens peace, security, and social cohesion. We must support timely and peaceful democratic transitions in Burkina Faso, Chad, Guinea, Mali, and Sudan, while supporting critical political, social, economic, and governance reforms across the region to reduce corruption and prevent further democratic erosion. We must help our partners adapt to and manage the consequences of climate change, which exacerbates conflict and violence, especially among marginalized groups. None of these changes will work if partner countries think we'll change our mind and walk away. We must be committed to this partnership for the long haul, address the risks intelligently, and work together equitably. The Global Fragility Act and the strategy afford us the opportunity to plan, partner, and learn from our joint work better than ever before. This is why I came away from my trip seeing the glass as half full. We're already recognizing where our own systems, culture, and protocols stand in the way of addressing conflict. This includes limited capacity at embassies, material support constraints, and a lack of flexible and adaptable funding. Some changes will require congressional support if we're going to be successful. Thank you. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to participate in this hearing today on behalf of MCC. MCC has benefited tremendously from bipartisan backing for many years, and so I also want to thank you and your staffs for your ongoing engagement and support. We know we can't be successful without it, which is maybe the right place to start actually in testimony, which is to say that MCC was founded by Congress to reduce poverty through economic growth. by partnering selectively with individual countries that share our values and working with them hand in hand to identify and address those things that are their greatest challenges to their economy. Today, that looks like power and electricity in Ghana. It looks like a rehabilitated port and a connection to the global economy in Benin. And it looks like ongoing investment in education and vocational training across Côte d'Ivoire. The Global Fragility Act doesn't change MCC or the way that we work, but it provides an excellent example about how MCC plays the long game by investing in resilience. We are a key part of how the United States shows up in nascent and vulnerable democracies. So I'm happy to talk today about how MCC investments in resilience address the underlying drivers of fragility and conflict. The topic matters more than ever today because the development landscape has become more challenging. Fragility is exacerbated by COVID, by a war in Ukraine that drives up food prices, by a number of economic and trade shocks. And while fragility creates challenges, over 2 decades, MCC has demonstrated evidence of an ability to get results in some of the most challenging circumstances. Africa represents a majority of our portfolio, and we're proud of that. We also think it provides lessons for an increasingly vulnerable world. MCC contributes to the United States goals by complementing the work of others here on the panel by helping nascent and vulnerable democracies deliver for their populations. We do that in a few ways. We partner with countries that share our values, and we use a scorecard to look for those countries that are striving to provide accountable governance to their populations. We see the effect of that selectivity even before we start working, where, for example, in post-conflict Côte d'Ivoire, the government took policy steps to try to achieve MCC eligibility and passed laws giving women economic rights that were equal to men for the first time. And today, millions of women across Côte d'Ivoire have the right to have a bank account, get a job, own a passport, work anywhere in the country, and that was before we started our work. Secondly, MCC understands itself to be establishing ways for democracies to collaborate to address the most challenging dimensions of economies and of the planet. We call that country ownership, but it means that our countries are in the driver's seat, both to set the direction of the investment and to drive the vehicle during implementation. For example, in Gambia, where in the aftermath of the Jammeh regime, as the country stepped onto its own democratic path, they declared a particular focus on access to electricity. And today, MCC is working with that country through a threshold program, both with the executive and the legislative branches, on the institutional environment needed to make that happen. Third, we learn together with our partners and transparently what works and what doesn't. And we post all of our evaluations at evidence.mcc.gov so everybody can find them and everybody can learn from them. Over our agency's short history, we have invested some $9 billion across 25 countries in Africa. And whether you see us as bolstering democracies trying to deliver accountably or reducing fragility by investing in resilience, we are proud of our work at the intersection of governance and economics. Looking ahead, MCC wishes to remain a high-impact part of the U.S. foreign assistance portfolio. We're approaching our 20th anniversary, and as a person who has approached more than 20 anniversaries, round numbers tend to make us reflective, and MCC is no different. We want to use our anniversary to set a vision for the next 20 years, to continue to deliver on the mission that Congress gave us, to reduce poverty through growth by working hand in hand selectively with country ownership and with accountability for results. We think of that in 3 ways. 1, where we work, 2, how we work, and 3, what we can deliver. In terms of where we work, we have heard stakeholders, including here in Congress, ask MCC to do more. And to that point, we're extremely grateful to this committee for its work marking up and working to support the passage of the MCC Eligibility Expansion Act, which would allow us to consider a broader range of countries. In terms of how we work, we know that we need to bring our 2 decades of experience to build on the lessons that we have to increase our efficiency, our speed, and our impact. And in terms of what we can deliver, here we look forward to working with our own staff, with our country partners, and with you all as we think about how to build on a successful model to meet the needs of an increasingly vulnerable world. In conclusion, 2/3 of MCC's portfolio is in the continent of Africa. We're proud of that. I hope you can hear that. Fragility does generate some of the world's deepest challenges, but we have found that working with our partners, it also generates some of our deepest success. We are able to support stronger economies and stronger societies. And so with that, I thank you for your time and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bass, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Hold on 1 second. What is that echo? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about how the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, partners with the private sector in Africa. I just returned from a trip also to Benin and Togo with the DFC team, where we met with government officials, DFC-supported companies, and potential future private sector clients and partners. We saw firsthand how strong economic development policies create jobs and promote stability. Yet these countries remain under threat from violent extremism. The tools DFC offers are a critical part of the U.S. government approach for addressing the root causes of instability and conflict. DFC is working with private companies in Africa across numerous fronts, in healthcare, agriculture, working with micro, small, and medium enterprises, infrastructure, including power stations and ports. In fiscal year 22, DFC committed $1.4 billion to projects in sub-Saharan Africa. DFC's Africa portfolio stands at more than $9 billion across 282 transactions in 34 countries. We've prioritized support for low-income and lower middle-income countries in Africa, with 90% of DFC's current Africa portfolio in those categories, and we're just getting started. Attracting private sector investment is one of the challenges that fragile countries face as they seek to get on the path to prosperity. Investors looking at emerging markets often see three challenges. One is the lack of political will that's required to create a reliable investment climate. The second is a lack of capacity amongst government officials, which is required to advance deals. And the third is foreign exchange risk. I provided details on these challenges in my written testimony. Countries must work, though, with development agencies, financing agencies, NGOs, businesses, and their own government institutions to overcome these challenges. All must act in concert and at sufficient scale. This type of collaboration is in line with the Global Fragility Act. DFC has committed itself to take on more risk and to allocate resources to hedge for those risks. When doing so serves our strategic interests, and we hope that we can count on the support from Congress to be with us in that journey as we take on more risk. Taking deliberate risk in priority areas creates greater opportunities to advance our collective mission. We're also supporting projects that address some of the root causes of fragility, including food insecurity and poverty. COVID and the Ukraine war exacerbated food insecurity, and DFC responded by scaling up its efforts. DFC far exceeded its food security goals by committing a total of $620 million to such projects in fiscal year 2022. One food security investment supports smallholder farmers with fertilizer across sub-Saharan Africa. We're giving a loan to One Acre Fund, which will provide agricultural inputs and services to over 400,000 smallholder farmers. DFC is also supporting numerous power projects, transmission projects across Africa, as well as off-grid energy projects. Healthcare is another DFC priority. In Africa, DFC is supporting projects that bolster local vaccine manufacturing, including a loan to Aspen Pharmacare in South Africa and a technical assistance grant to the Institut Pasteur de Dakar in Senegal. Though addressing the root causes of fragility is complex and challenging, we're optimistic. Would you like me to pause? We're optimistic that by working with partner U.S. government agencies and others, we will deliver sustainable development impact for the people of Africa. We're carrying forward the vision laid out in the BUILD Act for DFC to create economic opportunities for the world's poor and marginalized and to advance U.S. strategic priorities. The COVID pandemic, the food security crisis, and the global regression toward authoritarianism and political violence stand to make Americans feel less safe by exposing them to international pandemics, terrorism, and macroeconomic shocks. Supporting private sector investment in fragile contexts is one of the best ways that DFC can meet the development needs for Africa while serving the interests of the American people. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Good morning to all. Good morning to all. Chair Bass, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss U.S. foreign assistance and how it can be used to address the root causes of instability and conflict in the African nations where these conditions persist. Thank you also to my wonderful colleagues from USAID, MCC, and the DFC for joining as well all three of whose agencies USADF has collaborated with to mitigate these challenges. This being my first time appearing before you in my role as President and CEO of the U.S. African Development Foundation, I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the subcommittee for its long-standing bipartisan support of the important work of our agency. And if I might include a special thanks to Chair Bass, whose guidance and leadership has helped me to travel the great distance from sitting behind you to sitting before you this morning. Working through a community-led development model, USADF provides grant capital of up to $250,000 per enterprise or entrepreneur, capacity building assistance, and convening opportunities to develop, grow, and scale African entrepreneurs and enterprises. 100% of the staff of USADF employed on the continent of Africa are African nationals of the countries in which they serve. This helps make the agency more agile, impactful, insightful, and innovative as a foreign assistance provider that can operate in areas often too remote or insecure for other agencies of our government to operate. USADF's investments promote African-owned and African-led economic development by increasing incomes, revenues, and jobs, as well as creating pathways to prosperity for marginalized populations and underserved communities. The topic of today's hearing is one that is important to USADF's work. USADF currently operates full country programs in 21 nations across the continent, 17 of which are classified as either fragile or extremely fragile by the OECD. This fragility, is driven by hunger and food insecurity, lack of economic opportunity, and unemployment among youth and women, among many other factors. These drivers of instability are the challenges that USADF looks to address in its work and what I will be addressing with the remainder of my testimony. Food insecurity is not only a consequence of conflict, but a driver as well. We have seen just in the last few years how world events such as the COVID-19 pandemic or the Russian invasion of Ukraine can disrupt supply chains and lead to food insecurity across Africa. Agriculture is a core focus of USADF's work, as USADF supports agricultural cooperatives and agribusinesses with a combination of capital and capacity building assistance, helping build more resilient local food systems, increasing local food production. This helps to decrease reliance on imports, better prepare communities for external shocks, and alleviate conflict due to hunger and insecurity. USADF and MCC have worked together to improve food security through a Climate Resilient Communities project in Niger, designed to increase food production and incomes through investments in producer and processor groups, women and youth groups, and small and medium enterprises. Job creation can play an important role in fragile regions, as stable employment can lead to poverty reduction, increase productivity and economic growth, and reduce violence and conflict. Small and medium enterprises account for 80% of the jobs in sub-Saharan Africa, showing how critical SMEs are to the creation of resilient economies. USADF's assistance helps SMEs grow into sustainable enterprises that can create jobs and provide better livelihoods for their employees and members. Earlier this year, USADF and the DFC launched the African Small Business Catalyst, a business accelerator for early stage or early growth stage SMEs across the continent. Through this partnership, USADF and DFC are using complementary investment tools to boost private sector development in sub-Saharan Africa and strengthen SMEs to make greater impact in their communities. USADF places a strong emphasis on women and youth, who are often spoken of in Washington circles as small niche or special interest groups, but who in fact are the continent's marginalized majorities. I welcome the opportunity to address more in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ian, again, I want to thank all of the witnesses, and thank you for your testimony and taking the time to come here, but most importantly, thank you for the work that you do, because I absolutely believe that it is vital, and that one of the best ways to address conflict is through economic development. Mr. Jenkins, I wanted to ask, and you referenced to different, the reasons behind different conflicts, whether it was ethnic, or whether it's extremist, ISIL-affiliated groups. And I wanted to know if you could speak to maybe some of the different strategies that you use based on what the conflict is.
Thank you so much. Your opening statement did a great job describing the complexity of the compounding nature of all these different things. It's not poverty, it's not climate change, it's not ethnicity, it's all these things that come together. The violence that we see, the conflict that we're trying to prevent, it is the symptom. The root problem in all of these places is weak governance of one type or another. These governments are not resilient, which make them susceptible to others that want to prey upon them. And we can see extremists do a very good job, whether it's in Nigeria or Somalia or Niger. They arrive in a community, they diagnose what is going on and what's wrong, and they exploit those weaknesses. So the programs look very different around the continent, but in fact they look very much the same, because what they're trying to do is give agency to people that do not have agency. A young person in Burkina Faso has no hope.
Right.
Well, then if this person's going to give me a motorcycle and an AK-47,
Right.
suddenly I'm a recruit.
So, you know, when I went, I was thinking of Burkina Faso because when I was there and they talked about all of the terrorist attacks they had, it was a few years ago, so this might have changed. But it seemed like the origins were economic, exactly the example you gave. And so, you know, it seemed as though they needed economic assistance. But it might be different if it's religiously based.
It's economics, it's religious, it's ethnic, it's different some places, and other places it's all those things. But at the root cause, if you get into a village, you don't have to decide if it's because of climate or because of
Right.
COVID. You say, what does this village need? What do these young people need? How can we be responsive to them? It might be a school, it might be a clinic, it might be a job, but it's going to be hyper-contextual every time.
So your programming then is specific based on?
At its best. And that's one of the challenges, is how can we be agile and how can we take to scale things that need to be very particular based on very localized situations.
You know, Mr. Adkins, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, I know I was very surprised to hear and to learn of Africa's dependence on wheat from the Ukraine. And it just raised to me, you know, feed the future. So I'm wondering, from your agency, is there a focus on developing the agricultural sector? You made reference to that, but specifically around wheat.
100%, about 60 to 70% of USADF's annual allocated budget is spent on agriculture and agribusiness and development in that specific sector. We don't do very much specifically on wheat, but what we have noticed is that during COVID and during the conflict with Russia and the Ukraine, there were other kinds of challenges in communities being able to get shipments into their countries of imported foods, which of course they had the conditions to grow themselves.
Exactly.
And so on a recent visit to Cote d'Ivoire, there is one community collaborative group of farmers that we work with there called Loc Agri. And they were experiencing this challenge in importing rice from China. But right in their soil and right under their sun, they had the ability to do it themselves. And so we gave that cooperative our maximum level grant initiative. And when we went there, they were able to show us the rice paddies that they had developed, the milling facilities that they had developed, the aspiration that they were developing not only to feed local communities, but to grow into a regional producer in the region of Cote d'Ivoire in which they were, a national producer, getting people to have pride in eating Ivorian rice, and then hopefully from their aspiration to be able to export that rice across West Africa. And that's just one example of the kind of models we have where exogenous challenges open up people's eyes to the possibility that they could be doing many of these things for themselves all along.
That's a great example. That must be very, very rewarding to go see. My time has expired. Mr. Smith?
Chairwoman, your time never expires.
I'll have a round two.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you so very much for your testimony, for your leadership. I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to narrow it to a few. You know, Ed Royce did a wonderful job on Electrify Africa and Power Africa under President Obama. And of course, we're all for that. Maybe you might want to speak a little bit to that, Mr. Herscowitz.
Sure.
I would lay out a couple of questions for all of you. I also, you know, when you talk about, and we all care about food security, I was the sponsor twice of the Global Food Security Act, and this year was the chief co-sponsor. It's law again, and it's a great initiative. But it also emphasizes the first 1,000 days from conception to the second birthday to mitigate stunting. And where it's been implemented, it has had miraculous impact. And I just wonder, especially post-COVID, if we're, you know, gearing up to make sure that that food security and highly nutrition, you know, all kinds of things that can lessen stunting is being aggressively promoted still. A lot of countries sign up and then they wane in their commitment, in part because that's human nature. You know, gung-ho first couple of years and then it kind of dissipates. So, you're in a prime position to help get that further. On clean water, you know, diarrheal disease, as we all know, has always been one of the leading killers of children. Of course, oral rehydration therapy helps stop that and saves lives. Big time, USAID has been pushing that for decades. But, you know, water here in the United States is a big issue. I was the author of a bill, didn't become law, but we incorporated much of it into the Infrastructure Act. I called it Get the Lead Out, because we have problems with lead. They have more problems with pathogens in Africa. And I'm just wondering if we're doing enough on clean water and also wastewater. You know, we almost take it for granted that wastewater will be somehow dealt with in a clean and environmentally appropriate way, but it's not. And, you know, so many people get very sick from it. We have a problem even in my own district. The Trenton Water Works has had a real problem with its water, and we're in a mitigation strategy on that because people have not been well served by that utility. So I just, you know, wastewater is an issue that I think, you know, needs to be, and we've got the expertise that we can share big time with Africa because we've been through it. We've learned all the hard lessons the wrong way by not doing a good job on that. And finally, on the issue of two things. I chaired a hearing of the Lantos Commission a couple of months ago on cobalt in DR Congo, and the fact that 35 to 40,000 young Congolese children are being forced into mines. They go on their own volition, but they're you know, the Chinese Communist Party runs it in cooperation with the DR Congolese military. And these kids are getting sick, some are dying, and all of that cobalt goes to China where it's processed for electric vehicles. About 200,000 adults are also in grave risk. And there's been very little focused on that. Maybe you can speak to that as well, because I think it's an outrage. If you want an EV, buy one. But they should not, you know, the idea of having an electric vehicle should not be predicated on a child getting sick to the point of dying, getting cancer, going into these mines. It's just, it's outrageous. We had two Congolese testify, including one Jesuit priest. And their outrage was palatable, you know, that the international community is turning the other way and saying, we don't care as long as we get the EVs. We should care, and we have to care. So, and finally, about the religious component, we know that, you know, churches do a great job in reconciliation. I remember reading Across the Switchblade by David Wilkerson years ago on the great work that he did in New York with the gangs. Chuck Colson continues, he's now deceased, but his group, Prison Fellowship, helping people in prisons who find faith, and next thing you know, they're changed citizens, they're changed people. And I'm wondering, you know, how well we, on the extremism issue, bring faith into it.
Great, thank you. You raise issues that are important, issues that are near and dear to my heart as well. So, and also wanted to thank the chairwoman for all of her support on the Electrify Africa Act over the years and all of the work that, and Chairman Royce is on our Development Advisory Council as well. And so he's been a tremendous advisor to me and to everyone at DFC. So with respect to the Electrify Africa Act and Power Africa, it's still going very, very strong across the entire U.S. interagency. It's also one of the strong examples of collaboration between USAID and DFC. USAID pays for a team of people at DFC who focus exclusively on Power Africa deals, and they continue to move forward on transactions, both large on-grid transactions as well as off-grid transactions. Recently, we did a financing for $100 million for the Gigaton Empowerment Fund that will focus on off-grid energy as well, and we continue to look at on-grid deals. With respect to the Global Food Security Act, again, I use as the greatest example of collaboration, in my opinion, between USAID and DFC is the establishment of a food security unit at DFC. These are investment officers who are devoted exclusively to working on food security deals. And when we did the first development strategy for DFC, one of the focus areas was food security, and DFC had a very small portfolio. OPIC had a very small historical portfolio of food security. The head of the food security unit, I asked him what number he thought he could reach. He said $250 million. I said, that seems small. And his response was, well, I want to make sure that we're focusing on the smaller countries and not just getting pressure to do the large deals. Well, after a year, he exceeded that goal, and it was a 5-year strategy. We upped it to $500 million, to $1 billion, and now he's already exceeded that as well. So with really strong collaboration between USAID and DFC, we're really building a strong food security portfolio. On clean water, on my team, we've got a person who's dedicated to focusing on clean water projects. We have a transaction that we've done with the Water Access Acceleration Fund. We've done a deal with Water Equity. So across the whole agency, we're focused on water as well. It's also one of the pillars of our development strategy that we put into place. And finally, quickly on mining, DFC is focused on critical minerals as well. We did financing of a company called TechMet, which is doing cobalt and nickel mining in Brazil. But the board has also given us the authority to work in other countries as well as TechMet finds other sources. So we're continuing to look for opportunities where there's good human rights and good social and environmental standards being used to counter the PRC.
Representative Jacobs? I'm not sure if she's on the line. If not, Representative Muser?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, all of our panel. Still with me? Okay. Mr. Herscowitz, you certainly have an extensive background, quite impressive. I want to talk about Africa's energy reserves, primarily natural gas, how they are effectively utilizing, effectively accessing. And my first question to you is that, where do you rate that level of access, that level of development, and would more of our investment / resources applied to it provide benefits to not just the many African nations, their economic development, their infrastructure development, but even from a trade and export standpoint and assisting the world's energy needs? Just sort of a big open question on African natural gas reserves and us accessing them, Mr. Herscowitz.
Sure, thank you. DFC continues to support gas projects in Africa, and we recognize the importance of Africans themselves taking advantage of all the resources that they have. Those include natural gas. It includes vast amounts of sunshine, vast amounts of wind, vast amounts of hydropower. Africa is blessed with almost unlimited energy resources in a way that it can provide power not just to itself, but to other parts of the world as well. And so in terms of natural gas, DFC is financing a project in Sierra Leone. It's the Sika project. I just came back from, in my trip to Benin, talking about a potential gas project there as well that we would consider supporting. And then also, as you mentioned, I'm aware of multiple countries approaching African countries about trying to tap into their natural gas resources as well. So it's something that DFC does continue to support.
Yeah, I can't help, Mr. Herscowitz, always get the sense that natural gas is somehow a pariah to wind and hydro and And your answer kind of lends towards that. Is the DFC reluctant to invest in Africa's natural gas reserves? And if so, isn't it well understood? The data is there that and the analytical information that it's less expensive to access and is abundant and would be in the shortest term possible more beneficial to African nations as well as exports. And your investment portfolio lends to that. There is decline in energy investment by the DFC, particularly in Africa. And I'd like to know why.
So
We're well aware the sun shines in Africa, Mr. Herscowitz.
So I think the approach that we take at DFC is consistent with the approach that we took during the Obama administration and the Trump administration with respect to looking at taking all of the above approach to energy resources and thinking about what makes the most sense from a commercial viability standpoint for a country. Wanting to see, does it make sense for a country to use its natural gas resources, which do provide baseload energy, but also to use that as an ability to develop other resources which might be intermittent, like solar and wind. So it's important that countries take a broad-based energy approach, just like we do in the United States, and DFC continues to take that all-of-the-above technology approach that was written into the Electrify Africa Act.
Yeah, that's fine. And you're mentioning all of the above. How about all of the below as well? And natural gas has half the carbon emissions of other fossil fuels. I'm not sitting here suggesting that we invest in coal plants as most of the world is because of the strictness that has taken place on fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, particularly in my home state of Pennsylvania. And it's a problem. And we're going to get to the bottom of it because even on an international basis, this is very much a cause for the energy, the lack of energy availability worldwide, and certainly is the attributor to the high gasoline prices and heating, home heating fuel prices and diesel prices that Americans are facing. And I just think it's unfair that this ideology be taken into Africa when they have such reserves. And all we talk about is all of the above. I think it should be up to the African people to have a better understanding, and those investments not only go towards what fits into the ideology of this administration. You know, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Omar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get into my questions, I just wanted to take a moment and honor you. It's been really an incredible opportunity to get to serve under your leadership on this subcommittee, to have had you mentor me for the last 2 cycles, to share a love of Africa with you, and to see your leadership bring the light of the opportunities that exist on the continent and how we can truly utilize our partnership abilities to help Africa prosper. I am so enormously going to miss you. And I know that this committee and everyone in Congress is going to miss the contributions that you have made with the policies that you have championed into strengthening our relationship with the beautiful African countries on the continent of Africa. And with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about some youth conflict sort of related things. Youth population and violence can hardly be described as having a cause and effect relationship, but there is certainly some correlation between this demographic shift and the socioeconomic factors that are at play in conflict. Over the next 10 years, there will be as many as 29 million new young people entering into the African labor market. And these young people need jobs, education, and opportunity so that they can make their way in this world, which is why foreign assistance should be focused on investment in economic opportunities and empowerment, not overly prescriptive aid or constant conflict mitigation. This year, as part of my Pathway to Peace package, I introduced Youth Link International Act. This bill replicates the highly successful Domestic Youth Build program, which helps young people obtain the education and employment skills they need to achieve economic self-sufficiency. The training puts strong focus on creating jobs that also help build up the stocks of community infrastructure that need to be built or rebuilt, like housing, school, healthcare clinics, or green infrastructure. Replicating this program internationally will put young people on the path to prosperity and help them better engage in their communities. Mr. Adkins, have you seen success with these types of programs in the past? And do you feel that creating a Youth Build International program could be a smart strategy for the U.S. investment?
Representative Omar, greetings. I couldn't agree with you more, and certainly I believe that that is the direction that U.S. foreign assistance should go, and it is the reason for being for the African Development Foundation. Of course, at our foundation, youth are not some a population to be mainstreamed into our work, but in fact they are the mainstream of our work. And so one of the things that we do in terms of our approach is look at ways to do skill building, to do vocational training among youth. This is a model that we began in Somalia and had such great success that we carried it to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria, Senegal, South Sudan, and Uganda. And essentially what that program consists of is partnering with a local training facility to provide skill building that is based on market surveys of what businesses in the region, in the country need. And then what we do is when youth come into our program, first and foremost, 50% of them will be young women, 50% will be young men. Then we have partnered with businesses in the area, developed memorandums of understanding with those businesses, and they have agreed to hire 85 to 100% of the youth that are coming out of those programs. So these are not trainings where you simply get a certificate and a pat on the back and, hey, good luck out there in the world finding an opportunity. But what we're saying to youth is if you make it through this program, essentially you will be guaranteed a job. And that is because of the economic factor in conflict, in youth going off into directions other than what might be productive for themselves, for their communities, and for their nations. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Adkins. I did get an opportunity to survey the program in Somalia, and I hope that that strategy continues throughout the continent and that we get more resources behind it. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Kim?
Thank you, Chairwoman Bass and Ranking Member Smith. Thank you very much for holding this hearing, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us today. I have several questions, but let me just go through it really quickly. You all laid out very good presentation in your testimony, so let me go right into the question. Mr. Jenkins, first of all, I want to ask you about the USAID's the measuring success when it comes to countering violent extremism and addressing the root causes of conflict and terrorist recruitment, because, you know, what is USAID's conflict prevention and stabilization strategy in Nigeria? And given the heightened security risk in Nigeria and the departure of non-emergency staff from Nigeria, has USAID and or our partners' ability to implement and monitor programs changed?
Well, thank you for your question. It's disturbing to see what is going on in Nigeria right now for all of us. And having to pull out non-essential staff does impact our ability to monitor and evaluate the way we would like to. However, programming does continue. Nigeria is too big to fail. It is too important to the entire continent of Africa. It's impossible to travel in West Africa these days and not see that Nigeria is not the Nigeria it used to be. The leadership is no longer there. And we as a government need to do whatever we can to help them stabilize their own political situation so they can then again be a force of stabilization and peace in the region and on the continent. Thank you.
You mentioned in your opening that you are asking for congressional support. Could you be more specific? And you also alluded to that just now.
Thank you. So under the Global Fragility Act, there's 4 main objectives: prevention, stabilization, partnership, and management. Part of what we're doing now, implementing the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, is amassing a list of what are those impediments that are self-imposed by the U.S. government on the U.S. government. The law mandates that we come back to all of you and say, here are things that we need to change. It is extremely hard to move money at the pace that we need to move it into what we need to move it on. There is not enough contingency funding. There are a lot of various laws and authorities that over time have been put into legislation, all for good reason, but now sometimes get in our way. And we need to have an open discussion with all of you on Capitol Hill about what can we waive, when can we waive it, when can we move faster and get these things out of the way. So for me, that's one of the most important and exciting parts of the Act. We're working on that right now, hoping to come up and start that dialogue over what can we all do together so that we can, for instance, we don't have enough people at our embassies and our USAID missions in many of these countries. How can we incentivize that? What are the problems of how do we get behind those staffing shortages? That's a longer discussion that I think is really going to get into how we make a big difference in how we work.
Thank you. You know, I'm continuing with you, concerned about the escalating violence in Eastern DRC, specifically the clashes between the government of DRC and M23, which is allegedly backed by the Rwandan government. So what is USAID doing to address that root causes of instability in DRC, especially longstanding community grievances and lack of government services?
So thank you. Yes, DRC is, again, one of the hard cases for all of us. In a country that is so large, and what happens in Eastern Congo is much more dependent on what happens in Rwanda and Burundi than happens in their own capital back in Kinshasa. So USAID has a number of programs that are locally led, locally driven, including women, peace, and security programs in the Eastern Congo that are helping alleviate the situation, but the underlying causes, as you know there, are geopolitical. And our State Department would be able to speak better to what we're doing on the diplomatic routes. That's one of those places where we can try to alleviate some of the symptoms, but the underlying causes are something way beyond foreign assistance.
I know we got a little time here, but Ms. Mandaville, I want to talk about MCC and its core principle of country-led development. It's been critical of the agency's ability to effectively meet the needs of its partners. So what feedback are you hearing from partner countries in Africa about which types of investments would be most helpful?
Thank you for the question. No, absolutely. MCC works directly with the countries that with our country partners to identify what is binding their economy. And so that has varied quite a bit over time. We made a lot of investments in agriculture before Feed the Future. We made a lot of investments in power before Power Africa. We're making a continuing investment in that space as the economy structure around it changes. We are increasingly finding that countries are asking for those things that are backbone infrastructure. So, you know, to the question earlier around how the first 1,000 days even affect the lives of children and a population base, thinking about the role that backbone infrastructure might play in terms of actually connecting rural areas to marketplaces, connecting women and children to hospitals, whether our regional investment, for example, building connections between the port of Cotonou and Benin with landlocked Niamey, and working on not just the roads infrastructure, but the regulatory and institutional environment that's necessary so that the border crossing between Benin and Niger, which serves not just Niger, but also Nigeria fairly extensively, can actually have the efficiency scale that it needs. So I think we're finding that by working hand in hand with our partners and working in partnership with them as they implement, we're primarily continuing to invest in those things that are really binding their economies.
Thank you. Representative Jacobs. And then Representative Jackson will be after Jacobs if he's present.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for your leadership on this subcommittee. I think I speak for all of us when we say that we are really going to miss you chairing this committee, and I have so enjoyed getting to work with you over this past term, and have so been grateful for your mentorship and guidance through this very difficult first term that many of us freshmen have had. So I want to thank you all for testifying today. Mr. Jenkins, I want to start with you. As you know, multiple studies have found that one of the largest drivers of violent extremism is the abuse or perception of abuse by government forces, and that what we really need to be focusing on is delivering effective governance. USAID and its program evaluations have acknowledged this countless times. I know you spoke a little bit about violent extremism in response to my colleague's question, but could you speak to this issue of the relationship between effective governance and violent extremism, and how your Bureau assesses drivers of violent extremism, and then how USAID has seen this up close in its lessons learned from its programming?
Thank you, Congresswoman Jacobs, and thank you for your continued leadership on implementing the Global Fragility Act. Yes, as a famous study conducted by UNDP in 2017 found, 71% of violent extremists made the change from being extremist to violent extremist because they or a close family member exhibited violence from the state. So a heavy-handed security response to extremism fuels more extremism. One of the reasons on the recent trip I made to West Africa, we did that as a 3D trip. So it was Assistant Secretary of State, it was an assistant to the administrator of USAID, and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. A 3D approach that we could meet with those governments and say, we are taking an interagency approach. What are you doing? And they all came back and said, we understand. It can't just be a security approach. In fact, if it's only security, we're going to make the problem harder. People have watched for the last 10 years what's gone on in the Sahel, and it has not worked. And the countries of coastal West Africa keep reminding us we do not want to do what happened in Mali. We will be in control here, and we will learn from those lessons. And we at USAID are learning from the lessons ourselves. So if there's going to be security assistance, that security assistance has to be in with our diplomatic efforts as well as our development efforts. We have to work together. We have to work in true partnership within our government, but more importantly, with the governments that were there to help.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. Ms. Mandaville, I want to turn to you. In your opening statement, you talked about the MCC effect, where we've seen MCC scorecards incentivize governments to carry out important reforms to qualify for the grant programs. I think it's a very effective model that we can mirror elsewhere. And as we heard from Mr. Jenkins, one of the keys to addressing conflict, instability, and violent extremism is good governance. And so I would love to hear from you how we can further leverage this effect to incentivize the kind of reform that addresses the drivers of instability. And I think it's something we can really work on in the context of GFA countries like Mozambique, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo. So I was hoping I could share your thoughts on this and if your agency has been working with the other interagency process for the GFA.
Thank you very much for the question. No, absolutely, MCC makes really clear to all the countries that may wish to partner with us that the expectation is that we work with countries that demonstrate a commitment to democratic governance, the rights of their citizens, and democratic institutions. And so we actually do wind up engaging directly with a large number of countries that would like to seek MCC assistance. working directly with them on what our scorecard, a transparent set of 20 different policy indicators, including measures of democracy and control of corruption, what does it say is the right area for focus for them if they wish to improve the policy environment? I do think it has a direct relationship to reduction in the drivers of conflict, as you stated. In that space, we talk directly with countries about whether that is the protection of individual rights or whether that is about kind of the governing institutions that they have. And then are clear also with our board agencies as well, including USAID, State Department, Treasury, even trade actually, about what they may be able to do that supports those countries. I will say we have been pleased to be able to put countries that have successfully improved their policy environment, including in democracy, in touch with those countries that are trying to seek access now. So we connect Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone and the leadership there, countries that worked hard to improve their scorecard performance and access MCC. We now connect them directly with, say, countries, for example, leadership in Madagascar or even Democratic Republic of the Congo, which has recently identified MCC scorecard as a recipe for reform that they'd like to follow.
Thank you. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Jacobs. There's a couple of other members, but I'm not sure that they have questions, so I'm going to continue, and then Mr. Smith, if you want to as well. Mr. Jenkins, when you were talking about Burkina Faso, I remembered another issue when I was there, and that was the lack of staffing in our embassy. I mean, just huge gap. And I was wondering what has progressed, hopefully, with that. And it wasn't on, I mean, the problem was recruiting staff. That's what the problem was.
I'm not sure if it is better. I know it's not solved. And it's not just Burkina Faso, it's Niger, other places in the region. There is a shortage of foreign service officers for all the positions we have around the world. So it's not like there's a bunch of embassies that have more than they need. We don't have enough to adequately staff all of the embassies and all the USAID missions that we have. One of the things we're doing within USAID right now is looking at ways at how we can try to better incentivize those positions to drive people into those countries. The problem with the security situation is once it becomes an unaccompanied post and you can no longer have your family with you, that dramatically reduces the amount of people that want to go to those countries. So we're looking at some of the things that we have done in the past for places like Iraq and Afghanistan where we're able to put incentives on. Burkina Faso is it's a lovely place. You just can't get out and about the way we want you to be able to, and you can't have your family with you. So we are very much focused on it, and I can say I know that State Department is as well. How can we, it's a long-term problem that will have a long-term solution. We're looking for immediate solutions now that can try to then systemically solve it in the future.
Well, I had never seen it like Burkina Faso, though. I mean, I know that there is a problem in general, but the vacancy rate there was pretty dramatic. On DFC, one of the former members was talking about the gas production, and I wanted to know if you had any updates on Mozambique, what was happening there. And then also, I realize that there's a lot of non-African countries interested in the natural resources. But if DFC is doing anything to encourage African countries?
So I can't provide you, we're happy to provide you with an update on exactly the status of the transaction in Mozambique afterwards, but I just have to talk to the transaction team to get the latest information on that. But it's paused at the moment. In terms of non-African countries approaching African countries about gas, we're tracking it, but we realize it's a global market, and we're trying to be supportive of countries all over the world. In fact, DFC just provided financing for a gas supply project in Moldova. So we're continuing to finance gas projects. One of the challenges, and I laid this out in my written testimony, and one of the reasons for the decline in the number of energy projects in Africa, frankly, is it's the enabling environment. It's currency issues. It's lack of capacity. You're seeing African countries that are renegotiating power purchasing agreements, and that's spooking private investment. So what we can continue to do is send the message that if you want private investment to come into the countries, we have to work with you to make sure there is the proper enabling environment so that when a U.S. company or a company from elsewhere comes in and they sign a contract, that there's contractual sanctity and
Yeah.
there's not a renegotiation.
The reason why I was asking about, domestically on the continent is just thinking about the energy needs. I mean, 2/3 of the continent not having electricity, for example. Or like we were talking about with wheat. That's why I was raising that in terms of, especially with the AU's goals and the regional compacts, just hoping that there's more internal to the continent versus the rest of the world taking advantage of the continent's natural resources. In regard to MCC, any news on Ethiopia? Were there compacts there? Did we cut them off?
Thank you for asking. The MCC does not currently have an ongoing relationship with Ethiopia. They were originally eligible for a threshold program, and our board ended that relationship in December of last year.
So now that hopefully that peace will stick.
No, I mean, MCC's board meets every year annually to identify country partners we might work with, and so they'll meet this December, they'll meet next December, and they'll revisit every year which countries might be eligible for thresholds or for compacts. They'll look at Ethiopia's scorecard as well as the events on the ground.
Yeah, this December will probably be a little premature. But I do worry, like with AGOA, for example, when a country is in conflict and we cut them off. And then what does that say? You talked about, Mr. Herscowitz, you talked about having the African countries not renegotiate their contracts. But when we promote, U.S. businesses, as I spent a lot of time doing, promoting U.S. business involvement on the continent, but then they have to be concerned as to whether or not their business will be disrupted as well.
Thank you for that. That's something we take extremely seriously. It's one of the reasons MCC is so clear with its country partners, what both sides of the expectation are. We will follow through with our investment. We expect them to follow through with the commitment to democratic institutions and human rights. We're very clear in the run-up. It is a gut-wrenching, actually, when we have to end a relationship. Ethiopia, Burkina Faso, these are places we wished to make investments and we're not able to continue. But we think it's respectful to be very clear up front. This is both sides of the relationship. We will follow through on our side. We expect you to also follow through on your side.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Adkins, when you are developing and recruiting partners on the continent, are you able to provide with your resources technical assistance? Like you might find a partner that's not quite up to snuff, but with resources, they could improve their capacity?
Yes, absolutely. One of the biggest drivers of what we're doing when we're investing directly in African entrepreneurs and enterprises is this capacity building piece. And so that is around their management of their finances. That is around their ability to digitize their information and produce year over year information that shows their results, shows the returns on their investments. And really the driver behind that is the ability for them to become credit worthy and to grow beyond the need for grants, but make themselves eligible for commercial loans. And we have several programs looking at that, one with Standard Bank, which is across the continent. And essentially what we did in that program is we approached Standard Bank and said, hey, we need a list of all of the small and medium enterprises in a certain time frame that failed to get grants, or loans from the bank. They gave us the list of those people, and they also gave us the reasons why they were denied. And the agreement was if we could work with those enterprises to check off the reasons why they were denied, they could then come back to Standard Bank and they would receive those loans. And so that kind of technical assistance is key to what we're doing at USADF.
That's great. That's great. Mr. Smith?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If any of you would like to answer the previous questions I have asked, I would appreciate that, and particularly on the religious, entities.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. Yes, it's an issue very close to my heart. The power of faith leaders and religious leaders on the continent cannot be overstated. I would be very hard put, I'm looking at a map here of all the things that we're doing in Africa. I'd be very hard put to find a peace and security program that USAID is implementing that does not have some aspect of engagement with local faith leaders. Thank you for pointing out in Nigeria, it's not just between faiths, it's often within faiths. And we look at religion as a reason for violence, it's also one of the most strongest sources of resilience. As you know on the content, the most respected leaders at the local level are usually a faith leader and or the traditional chief, who often is the same person. So I recently was made aware of a program in Ghana, where in northern Ghana, every year at Ramadan, Friday speeches at the mosque tend to be incendiary and lead to violence. So this last year, a program that was completely designed by a local organization got together religious leaders and radio stations who often would take these sermons and then repeat them, came together, made a memorandum of understanding. They said, we're not going to incite violence this year, and there was no violence. That was all done locally driven, local ideas, and it's using communities with their own faith leaders coming together.
Thank you. The Xi Jinping's malign influence on not only his own people, on the Uyghurs, credibly accused of genocide. I think he has committed a horrific genocide, in which he said, show no mercy, and they're showing no mercy. I'm wondering if the governments of sub-Saharan Africa in particular are recognizing what a bad deal it is to engage with the Chinese Communist Party. Again, our fight is not with the Chinese people, it's with the Chinese Communist Party that represses their own people from the use of torture and all the other extrajudicial killings that occur there. So that would be the first. Are we doing enough to fill in that gap? And secondly, the Ethiopia, when Abe, I should say, became the prime minister, I had introduced a resolution that was a prescriptive list of what we were hoping he would, and as a matter of fact, Karen and I worked on that very diligently. It passed the House. Then we went there. We met with him. We were very impressed with him. He was doing everything that we thought and what he thought, what others thought he should be doing. And then, unfortunately, there was a turn for the worse there, obviously. But the November 2nd peace agreement, I've read it. I'm hoping that it's sustainable, and I would be wondering what all of your thoughts might be on that as well. I mean, it has so many, like TPLF must respect the authority of the government. That may sound like it should be a given, but I wouldn't take that one to the bank unless it's clearly laid out. And I'm wondering if, your sense is that this is going to hopefully usher in a period of peace and reconciliation and disarmament.
I'll defer to my colleagues on the analysis on Ethiopia. But to the point of how the United States continues to engage with those countries that share our values, this is a significant piece for MCC. We're selective to identify countries with shared values, including respect for the rights of a population and democratic institutions. We work together with that country to identify its biggest economic challenges. We work hand in hand to address them and to overcome them. And when we're done, there's results that are visible to the population, and there's no debt. We think this is one of the best ways we can show up.
So countering PRC, it goes to the heart of what we're trying to do at DFC in addition to development. And they intersect, because part of development is making sure that investments are sustainable and benefit the people in the countries where you're doing the work. And so some of the significant changes that happened when we went from being OPIC and USAID's DCA to DFC is that we were given the ability to work with local companies as well. And so we already in the first few years have added more than 70 clients. We've been hosting town halls in coordination with the U.S. embassies, Commerce Department, USAID, to identify local companies that we can support. But at the large scale as well, we've been investing in infrastructure funds. There's the Urban Resilience Fund, where we gave about an $80 million loan to a $400 million fund that's making investments in infrastructure. Part of the reason for my trip also, when I went to Togo and Benin, was to look at what infrastructure opportunities there would be for us as well. But it's also the U.S. standards are just so much better. And what I'm hearing from people on the ground is they want to do more business with U.S. companies and companies from elsewhere, because when the PRC comes to a country, they bring their manuals in Chinese, they bring their own management who are from the PRC, and there's not a lot left for the people in the countries, whereas the U.S. model is to really build local capacity. And we don't just do it because it's the right thing to do, it makes more economic sense as well.
Yes.
Just on Ethiopia, Yes, it was a bright spot, and then 2 years of catastrophe. So we are very excited to see the announcement of the cessation of hostilities on November 2nd. Right now, as people start in Kenya, the negotiations continue on what implementation looks like. We are very interested to see how implementation happens. We stand by. Our special envoy, Mike Hammer, stands by. We stand by with other nations to help implement that as we can, and let's hope that this is the end of a horrific war.
You know, to your point, Mr. Herscowitz, about the Chinese bringing their own personnel on one trip to Kinshasa on my way to Goma, I'll never forget, we went to a huge project. I was with some of the people from the embassy, and it was all Chinese workers and Chinese overseers, and the workers did not look very happy. I wondered if they were gulag labor, but it was terrible, and they do it everywhere, as the chairwoman knows so well as well. It's just, you know, and then they leave a big debt. So hopefully we can ratchet up in this coming years so that it's the U.S. and I mean, if only China had a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but they don't. I thank you very much, and again, I want to thank the distinguished gentlelady from California for her great service, and we all wish her great success as the new mayor of Los Angeles.